Good. It's so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, and honestly, it is such an honor for our club to have you with us in these weird times. It's just so great to stay connected. So first, I
Yeah.
just wanted to ask, I think you're out in California. How are you doing?
Fine, yeah, yeah. I mean, even though LA is, I guess, the second largest concentration of the virus, um, I'm up on the north side of LA, so I'm kind of out of the thick of things, and everything's been pretty calm here. I mean, I live close to Pasadena, if you know where that is,
Yep.
and yeah, life's pretty normal. Go to the grocery store a couple times a week and do some takeout, and yeah.
Yeah. Sort of, it's interesting. We're sort of all having this like um, strange shared experience, I guess, right now. So, in some ways, it's been a really interesting time. During this time, have you been homebrewing at all, or found any time to do that?
Yeah, I've done a couple, 2.5 gallon batches.
Nice.
I got one of the new Anvil foundries,
Oh,
and
cool.
at, having gone from a 10-gallon system to a 5-gallon system, now this 2.5, it is so easy to clean up.
It's
It's
like
just
it's
like,
nothing.
yeah, done. Yeah, 15 minutes maybe.
Wow, wow.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's been a real boon.
Oh, that's
Um,
awesome. What are some
uh,
things you've been brewing recently?
well, I did the best beer I did was a Munich Dunkelbock,
Ooh,
and so it's about 6.5%. Um, very dark and chewy, but not a heavy roast character. It's roughly, if I remember right, it's like 40% Munich malt, 30% or 35% Vienna, 10 or 15 crystal, and and then another 5 or 10% roast barley. I think it's like five.
that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it came out great.
So,
Um,
yeah, someone earlier today actually brewed a very similar beer, so
oh,
seems like it's the time for it.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I was so excited when you said you would join us because you are this book is I
Yeah,
think one of the seminal books for homebrewers. I have a very well-worn copy.
nice.
My boyfriend Russell separately bought a copy, so we have two copies. We also brew a lot from this Brewing Classic Styles.
Oh yeah,
This is a amazing reference book. I think Brett may actually be brewing something from here or from How to Brew today.
nice.
Um, I think this book, How to Brew, was maybe first published in 2000, so quite a while ago, or
Yeah,
maybe even earlier. So I'm curious. I imagine the homebrewing scene was much different then than it is today.
yeah.
What are some of the most significant changes from your perspective?
Um, just the continual evolution of ingredients, really, that's been one amazing thing. I mean, when I started, dry yeast consisted of Red Star baking yeast. Even though they said it was beer yeast, it was phenolic, it was baking yeast. Um, and then, and then right around that same time, White Labs came on the scene and Y yeast, and they both started getting better and better and more productive, wider distribution. So yeast has improved tremendously. I mean, these days, dry yeast, there's literally no reason not to use it. Um, in terms of convenience,
Hmm.
it doesn't need as much aeration. Um, they've got it. Uh, they've done the studies to prove that rehydration isn't really necessary. You can just sprinkle it on. So I mean that's amazing time saver with the whole not having to do the starters and so on.
For sure.
Um, what else? Um, Brew in a bag is another. um, interesting evolution of methods because when I was writing Brewing Classic Styles with Jamil, and this was 2005, I think we were doing that. Um, I wrote about brew in the bag at the time. If you look in the back where I'm talking about mini mashes, there I am with a paint
Mm-hmm.
strainer bag, and and I had seen that sort of thing done. Um, 5, 6, 7 years before that. Williams Brewing, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, they're out here in California. They marketed a mash tun, like a cooler mash tun, with the bag that you put inside as the filter medium. So that was the false bottom, as it were. Um, I guess I don't remember, and I'm pretty sure in their write up in the catalog, everything was paper catalogs back then. Um, yeah, you simply drained through the bag, through the spigot. You didn't raise it out or anything. So it's kind of interesting how that has, changed over the years.
Yeah.
These days, brewing a bag is in no sparge, especially for home brewing and especially for small batches, is just the way to go. It makes it so easy and saves so much time.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of people doing that today or doing some mix of it. We started out doing the mash tun with the false bottom, and then we got one of those brew bags. And for a while, we were sort of doing like brew in a bag and then separate mash tun. And then one
Uh-huh.
day, this light sort of just went off like, why don't we just put the bag in the mash tun? Like, it'd be so much easier.
Yeah, yeah,
And it is like, honestly, I think that is one of the things that has just like revolutionized our personal brewing process because it is so much easier.
yeah.
Um, um, so I do have a very specific question for you about that book that honestly I've been wanting to ask you for a very long time,
Okay.
which is you have this amazing analogy in the book about mashing, which is that imagine that you've just had a storm in your yard and there are all these like sort of branches in your yard. You have all these different tools for it, hedge trimmers, handheld clippers, weed whackers, a lawnmower, but you can't like access all the tools at the same time, and different tools serve different purposes. So like, you want to use the right tool for the right purpose. And it's just so evocative, this analogy, and
Good.
it's like really always stuck with me.
Oh,
And so,
good, good.
so I'm just wondering, where did that come from? Like, what made you pick that analogy to illustrate sort of enzymes working on long chain sugars?
Yeah, I don't remember how I came up with it. I mean, I know I did. I mean, but it really is, that's how my mind works. When I'm looking at research and I'm comparing different papers and kind of assembling it in my mind, then I think, okay, I know these things happen. How can I relate that to someone? Um, and I guess I'm always looking for those little analogies and things. I've been filming some or videoing a complete, how to brew video with the
Oh, so
AHA
cool.
recently. Yeah, and as I'm looking at, starting to write down, how do I, describe, you know, getting started in brewing. I've had so many people over the years that come up to me and say, oh yeah, I've been reading everything. I've read your book and I read it a couple times and I've this, but I haven't brewed yet. And it's like, well, just do it. It's not that hard.
Take the plunge. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the worst can happen? But, so I think, well, how can I explain this to somebody? You don't have to know how it works. You just have to know that it works. Just
Hmm.
like driving a car.
Hmm.
You can learning to drive is no big deal. You don't know how to get in and change the transmission, but you know how to drive from A to Ohio. You know,
Yeah,
it's out there.
exactly.
You can do it. And so yeah, these analogies. Maybe it's just because I'm a dad too. You're always thinking in that way. How do you explain this? It's like,
Oh, yeah,
but
that makes
anyway,
a lot of sense.
you don't want to smoke that. Believe me.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why so many people have your book as their first book. You know, it's just you don't you don't really have to understand it to start brewing, but then if you want to take the next step and understand it, it's sort of the tools are there to do so. So
Yeah.
I know that I've always really appreciated it. I noticed that you also make it available, I guess, online, which is amazing. It's amazing to have that resource too. It seems like the book gets sort of updated every couple years. How do you decide like that it's a good time to update, or like is it when something changes, or you just think about things a different way?
Um, yeah, is it the time between changes has been growing exponentially. I don't know. It'll probably be 20 years before I get the next one done. Um, but yeah, I had done the first edition in 1999, 2000. And then after my wife said, you should do this in hard copy, I did the hard copy, and that was a complete revision. Or, at least I went through everything and tried to explain it a little more and correct misconceptions that I'd had at the time. Um, and likewise, by the time 2006 rolled around, or 2005 or whatever it was, um, and Ray Daniels said, "Hey, we'd like to look at your next book." And it's like, well, I'd like to revise How to Brew, because
Hmm.
there's some things I want to change, things that other brewers had called me out on. It's like, oh, okay, right. um, so, and then the most recent edition, from 2017. Um, yeah, in the last, this has been, what, 10 years
Hmm.
since the previous one. So, you know, we had gone from fly sparging only to batch sparging in 2005 and 6. And then no sparge became more popular. And then brew in a bag became hugely popular. All the hops changed for the worse. And
We'll have to get into that a little bit.
um, yeah, there was just, there's so many details that needed updating. And all these recipe books were coming out, and of course I had brewed a lot more, and I wanted to, I my first recipes in the first edition, How to Brew, in the second edition, they're all base malt and caramel malt. That's it, you know.
Hmm.
And but as I and part of that was simply because Munich malt, Vienna malt, other malts were just really weren't available. I mean, they would be available, but they'd be 2 years old, and they were rare for quite a time. Now, of
Yeah.
course, you walk into every shop and they've got 30 odd malts all waiting for you.
Yeah,
So
we're so
yeah,
lucky.
yeah, yeah. Especially over there having Brit or Nesters. I mean,
Oh,
they
they're the
got it.
best.
Yeah,
I know, I feel so lucky. It's like all of my homebrew gods are like in one place right now.
yeah, yeah.
One thing that I still struggle with a lot is water chemistry.
Okay.
And I don't know why. Maybe it's just I haven't taken the deep dive into it yet to really understand it. And I don't inherently, and I think one time we just used way too much to adjust, and it came out very uh, minerally tasting,
Yeah,
so it was
yeah.
unpleasant. Um, so I guess since you literally wrote the book on water, um, what is one thing, if you could take one thing to tell a home brewer to remember about water chemistry, what would it be?
You don't have to imitate classic brewing cities.
Hmm.
In the recent edition of How to Brew, this one, the 2017 one,
Mm-hmm.
um, I put in the brew cube, and I don't know if you've seen it or not, but you visualize a Rubik's cube, and you define your beer, the style of beer, by three parameters: flavor balance, color, and structure. Now, flavor balance is easy. That's your sulfate to chloride ratio. You know, malty, balanced, or hoppy. Your color is simply residual alkalinity, so pale, amber, or dark. Negative residual alkalinity, zero residual alkalinity, or positive, for dark beers. Um, and then structure. This is one it's kind of new, and it is a subtle effect, but it's the difference between like light seasoning and heavy seasoning. You know, how much sulfate and chloride are we talking about in the water?
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at Bohemian Pilsner, German Pilsner, Dortmunder Export, three beers, very similar recipes, but they're different beers. And one of the reasons they're different is because of the water they're used to make them. Bohemian Pilsner, you know, big, malty, hoppy, soft flavored beer because there's not much mineral in the water to
Mm-hmm.
support those flavors. That's what I mean by structure. You go to German Pilsner, you know, a lot more mineral in the water. Now you've got a crisper, cleaner tasting beer. Dortmunder Export, actually a lower gravity beer than the other two styles, but it doesn't taste like it because now you've got even more mineral supporting those flavors. And that's what I mean by structure. So you've got those three parameters, and the property, the water property that corresponds to structure is your calcium level, 50, 100, or 150. Now, most beer styles fall in the soft to medium structure category. Soft, you know, Bohemian Pilsner, medium, anything from best bitter to Munich Helles
Mm-hmm.
to, you know, I mean, just all over the place. A lot of beers fall in the medium category. And to brew those, you should be looking somewhere between 50 and 100 ppm of calcium. That creates, you know, good clarity, good yeast flocculation, um, and calcium, even though it doesn't have a flavor per se, it
Mm-hmm.
also enters into that structure mode where it firms up the body and mouthfeel of the beer. Um, there are only two styles I can think of that fall in the firm category, and those would be Dortmunder Export and Burton Ale.
Mm-hmm. The
So,
classic.
yeah, so that's how I want people to think about water. Is like, I'm going to brew this kind of beer. It's going to be dark, it's going to be medium structure, and it's going to be malty. Okay, malty, sulfate to chloride ratio of like a 1/2 to 1, more
Mm-hmm.
chloride than sulfate. Medium structure, around 100 ppm of calcium. I'm going to add some calcium salts to do that, of course. And in this case, I would use calcium chloride because I want more chloride than sulfate. And finally, residual alkalinity. If it's a dark beer, now I'm looking at towards that plus 100 range of residual alkalinity. And you really don't want to go over 100 ppm as calcium carbonate. That's plenty of buffering.
Yeah.
Even for Russian Imperial Stout or an Imperial Red, you'll still, it's still enough.
I like
So,
that. I like that way of thinking about it, that matrix of like maybe splitting it into three different styles. And I wonder, like, I'm thinking now, I want to go out and get an example of each of those styles to taste them side by side and see, like, oh, okay, now I can sort of slot in, like, this is what this profile is, and this is what
yeah,
this profile is, and understand that way. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to get your 2017 book now, so I can so I can see that
yeah,
cube. That sounds really helpful. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
I do have some other questions, but I can't let your hop comment go by without
Oh,
asking you what you meant. I'm very curious what you meant about the development of hops since 2000.
yeah, I'm old school. I grew up on Cascade. I like Cascade for pale ales, and Centennial as well. Um, all of the new super fruity tropical hops. Um, you got to understand that when I started homebrewing, you know, in the 90s, um, you would, you know, you go around taste each other's beers at the clubs, just like you all do today. But the signatures of bad homebrew or needs improvement was that it would be super estery or it would be very phenolic. And so as a result, I always associate phenolic flavors and very fruity flavors as being bad homebrew. You know,
Mm-hmm.
need to work on your fermentation, temperature control, you know, various issues that
Mm-hmm.
cause beers. So yeah, I mean, uh, there are some delightful hops out there today. Mandarin of Bavaria is a very nice one. Um, but Mosaic still has not doesn't
I'm
make
with
the
you on
grade.
Mosaic. I'm
Yeah.
with you.
Too, to me, it's just got that overripe fruit, that where
Yeah.
right the fruit has started to
Almost
turn.
rotting,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just can't get past that one.
Yeah,
But
I'm with you. Several of our brews today are actually, and we brewed a beer earlier today with Mandarina Bavaria. It was a hop. We had, we're doing a fundraiser today for our local New York City breweries, and one of the incentives was if you donate, I forget how much it was, you can pick a hop that brewers have to use. And so
oh,
Mandarina
nice.
Bavaria is one of those. And I think that people are really excited to use it because it's got like some really interesting qualities while still being, I think, noble hop related, right? So
Yeah,
sort of
yeah,
some classic and some new world
mhm,
characteristics altogether.
yeah.
Um, what are so you mentioned, like going around to homebrew clubs, tasting homebrew, which is one of the best things that I love about the Brewminaries also. What are some of your other favorite things about sort of homebrewing and the homebrewing community?
You know, the number one thing about homebrewers and brewers in general is that they are passionate about sharing good beer.
Mm-hmm.
We're all interested in knowledge. We're all interested in improving our own beers. Um, you don't run into arrogant, possessive people in the brewing industry very often. There's only like a couple. Um, and One of my favorite stories from when I was writing How to Brew, and this would have been for the blue edition that you have.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to get better definition on enzyme uh, optima, both temperature and pH, and found an article and traced the author. And this guy up here in Idaho worked for the what do you call it? Oh, yeah, the federal agency escapes me at the moment, but you know, like the Malting Barley
Mm-hmm.
Association and so on. And he he said, "Oh yeah, well, why don't you call me and we can talk about it. It's easier than trading emails." And I said, "Sure." So I call him, and he goes, "Oh, here, let me just go in the other room here," and we started talking. Well, it turns out he's at his daughter's house. She's just had a baby, so they're visiting, you
Wow.
know, and he's talking to me about enzymes, and and I said, well, okay, and he covered the proteases, and I said, well, I also need to find out more about the amylases. And he goes, oh, for that you need Evan. And I said, okay, Evan, fine. And I said, who's that? And he goes, Evan Evans. He's in Tasmania. Tasmania,
Wow.
okay,
Of course.
yeah. And so, but he goes, yeah, here's his number. Call him. And so then I think it was the next day or no, I think I called him. I called him that evening because of the big time difference. I waited till like 11 o'clock at night our
Mm-hmm.
time and called him. It was like 10 in the morning their time. Um, and he comes on the phone. He goes, "Oh yeah, sure, sure." And then we start talking. And I think about 20 minutes into the call, I find out he is in the car with his family. He is pulled over on the side of the road to talk
Wow.
enzymes with me. And
Wow.
so helpful. I mean, I've run into so many people in the brewing industry that are so helpful and so eager to share knowledge, to help each other out. It's just amazing.
And here
So,
you are talking to us doing the same.
well, yeah,
So, I do think that is one of the things I think that is so, the thing I deeply love about this community is it's just so based on sharing, like
yeah,
sharing knowledge, sharing beer, um, brewers who become professionals and share their spaces with us, like just so much
yeah,
generosity of spirit in this community is really amazing. And I think this is like a particularly weird time since, it's such a social hobby. It's something that really depends on sort of physically in the same place and being able to
yeah.
experience the same things. I'm curious, I feel like you are so connected to these communities. What are some ways that you sort of seen them stay together and supporting each other? And like, do you have any like thoughts on ways that people can try to do that more in these like weird times?
Yeah, I mean, like you all are doing now. I mean, Zoom has been a big help. I've it's I'm usually doing like one or two webinars, three, four webinars a week these days.
Wow.
Uh,
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
so um, I've participated in club meetings. There's a Texas club that Jamil and I just did a Brew Strong show with,
Oh, cool.
where we joined them in their weekly Friday meeting. Um, Talked a little bit about brewing for competition, but then otherwise just sat back and talked beer. Um, so that's been a big help, I think. And I think this time at home, I mean, you run out of other things to do. You might as well brew something, you
Yeah, for
know.
sure. We're
So
definitely brewing more.
yeah,
Um, do you have any sort of like projects or things that that we should be on the lookout for, or that that
I'm working on a new book.
oh, great.
It's
Amazing.
and it's called How to Brew in Your Kitchen, and it's about small batches. 2.5 gallon, 1 gallon batches in your kitchen,
Perfect.
because again, these days, more and more people are brewing in apartments, brewing in small spaces, um, and yeah, small batches they're easier, they're less demands on your time, um, and so and because this thing is now 600 pages. You know, it's it's huge.
Yeah.
It's rather intimidating for the beginners. So I wanted to write a 100-page book for that would entice beginners to pick it up and see how easy brewing really is, and give it a shot.
I love that. It's really, I think it's really timely. We've actually had a question earlier today from someone who was like, what advice would you have for someone who wants to brew smaller, brew a gallon at a time and maybe not five? So if the person who asked that question is on the call still, watch out for this book. And Bitter and Esther is actually, I think, is starting as a joke, is selling pint glass
Kits,
homebrew kits. Yeah. Which
nice.
at first I thought were so silly, but actually seemed like such a great way to experiment. And, it's low stakes. Like,
Yeah,
why not try
yeah,
it out?
that's right.
So I see a lot of potential for that. I think that there's like a lot of curiosity about it, especially now that people are sort of like looking for different ways to be creative and sort of get involved.
Yeah.
And kind of really understand where things that they consume are coming from and how they're made.
Yeah. Well, I think the ready availability of all-in-one systems these days is another good reason to take up these smaller batches.
Hmm.
Um, Small footprint, just plug it right into 110 versus needing 220.
Hmm.
Yeah, they work. And like I said, they're they're super fast to clean up. So yeah, I think the brewing technology is advanced back to closer to the home level, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It's much lower like barrier to entry to you don't have to like get all this stuff,
Yeah,
have tons of things that take up a lot of space.
yeah. Don't have to go out and steal kegs at midnight and come drink them. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, some people here might still be doing that, but well, thank you so much, John, for your
You're very
time.
welcome.
It truly was such an honor to have you on. Everyone was so excited. So I know you're really busy, and we really, really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Yeah. Let me know
Great.
if I can do anything else to help y'all.
Oh, you're amazing. Thank you so, so much.
You're
I hope you
cool.
all stay well. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice evening.
You too.
Bye.
Bye. Wow, guys, I need a minute. That was so amazing. Okay, so brewers, if you guys want to come back, if you're still there.
Am I there?
Hello, welcome back. Um,
Mine's weird. Hold on.
so how are you guys doing? Ben, where are you at?
There might be a loud fan going, but I'm at boil. I actually decided to do a 90-minute boil. So I'm at 30-minute boil point right now. So 30 more minutes, and then I add my hops, and then 30 more minutes after that.
Why are you doing a 90-minute boil? I'm curious.
I saw the color of the wort, and it's
Ah,
very, very pale. I thought the honey malt would be add a bit more color. I also, if you can see, my pre-boil OG is 1.030. So a little low, but I'm only targeting 1.046, and I had a lot more
okay.
in the kettle. So it's not totally off, and I think a 90-minute boil could at least get close. So
That's interesting. So you're sort of doing it as you sort of are making an adjustment to what you thought you'd be doing just based on the results that you got.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I really like that because I think a lot of people sort of have a very dogmatic view, including myself, of like must always do X, like must always boil hops for 60 minutes, must always do a 90-minute boil when you have Pilsner. And I think the more I sort of experiment with maybe not doing that once, the more I find like, oh, there isn't actually a rule. It's like maybe sometimes it's a good idea, maybe sometimes you don't have to. Brett, how are you doing? Where are you at?
So I was going to say I actually had kind of the opposite problem that Ben had.
Mm-hmm.
It's very strange, and I have a feeling it has something to do with the step mash. But according to the software, I got 98% conversion.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe there's a mistake somewhere else because that seems like insanely high. But so the starting gravity of this beer should be around 1.049.